In 1180, King Sverre of Norway detailed the sighting of a mysterious sea monster with multiple arms, large enough in size to destroy an entire ship. In 1861, a French gunboat encountered a massive animal with serpentine appendages, 20 miles northeast of the Canary Islands. Their accounts would be denied and ridiculed. In 2005, 2 Japanese marine biologists placed cameras 9,000 meters deep into the North Pacific Ocean. They would become the first to capture footage of a live giant squid in its natural habitat. After 800 years, the Leviathan could hide from humanity no more. On February 4th, 2022, Legend Story Studios released Everfest, the 6th set for the trading card game Flesh and Blood, and along with it, the weapon card Kraken's Aethervein. 2.5 years later, it would become the strongest weapon the game has ever seen. In Flesh and Blood, a hero-based card game where most classes wield metal armor with hefty weapons, wizards occupied a unique space in the game's design. In the game's first set, Welcome to Wraith, damage was exclusively dealt in one way: physical. You were rampaging around the jungle with fists and clubs as Reinar, or deftly chaining strike after strike as Katsu. Defense, too, was physical. You were dodging out of the way and parrying with the sabatons of your refraction bolters. But with the release of the game's second set, Arcane Rising, attacks could now deal arcane damage. No longer were you just swinging around a sword of steel. You were summoning the very esoteric forces of nature, ravaging your opponents in a torrent of lightning and fire. The unorthodox method of attack is reflected in the unorthodox way you play the class. Your turn was no longer just your turn, it was our turn. Wizard's win con is often to catch you unaware, blasting you for damage when you're least expecting it. Many have fallen victim to the famous Kano bullshit, where just as you swing at the Drakai with your powerful lethal attack, he activates his Storm Striders, flips through his entire deck, and burns you to a crisp with 34 arcane damage that you, in your infinite hubris, did not save a card for. Arcane damage cannot be blocked. Rather, it must be prevented using equipment with the Arcane Barrier keyword. But this is often awkward and difficult. Most classes can't reliably bring more than 3 Arcane Barrier equipment without compromising their own offensive power. So if you have 3 Arcane Barriers, you can only nullify 3 of whatever attack Kano blasts you with. This is the same regardless of whether he's dealing 5 arcane damage or 50. Of course, wizards weren't without weaknesses. They were often glass cannons, tricky and powerful, yes, but fragile. Kano himself starts at a measly 30 health, a sizable handicap from the standard 40, and if he misses his one big attack, he's often left without enough gas in the tank to finish off his opponent. This sort of playstyle would remain more or less the same with the release of the game's second wizard from the Everfest set, Icelander Stormvine. Icelander couldn't do a crazy amount of damage the way that Kano could, but she could more than make up for it by being able to consistently disrupt her opponent. She'll bide her time while you ready your attack, and then force a Frostbite token on you at the perfect moment, ensnaring your body in a thick column of unbreakable ice and leaving you without the pitch to play your cards. But we're not here to talk about Icelander. We're here to talk about Icelander's signature weapon, Kraken's Aethervein. Much like the Krakens of our own myths, the Krakens of Wraith are unfathomable, mysterious creatures. We see only a glimpse of one in the background art of the weapon, with its dark tentacles writhing underneath the ocean's surface. The card spoiler text reads, "It sleeps amongst the shifting tides, as the shadows of its tendrils loom over the turbulent seas. Those seeking knowledge may find enlightenment in its soft embrace, but beware, lest you lose yourself within its endless dream." This idea of gaining knowledge is reflected in the card's mechanics. Attacking with this weapon offers you the chance to draw cards equal to the amount of damage your opponent took from it. At the time of the card's release, Kraken's Aethervein could only deal 1 damage, meaning the most you could do was draw 1 card. Nevertheless, every card gamer knows that card advantage is perhaps one of the strongest things you can have in any game, except maybe Uno, and countless matches are won off the difference of just 1 card. Kraken's 1 damage can be more than the sum of its parts, too. It's such a small amount that most times it'll be easier to just take it, but at the same time, threatening to draw a card is incredibly dangerous. Depending on the sort of deck being played, you might have to give up an entire card from your hand just to make sure Kraken doesn't get its on-hit effect. This is especially annoying when combined with Icelander's ability to consistently pressure your resources. After you're done paying off all those frostbites and staving off the card effects, a perfectly timed Kraken can leave you unable to do anything while Icelander fixes her hand. Kraken's Aether Vein would see moderate success after its release, with strong tournament showings like Kevin Zanker's top 4 Icelander run at Calling Krakow in 2022. Yet, in just a few short months, Kraken's Aether Vein would be completely outshined with the release of Flesh and Blood's 7th set, Uprising, and with it the newest wizard weapon, Waning Moon. Waning Moon is an incredibly powerful weapon, allowing you to constantly chip damage at your opponents, threatening 5 damage per turn cycle for only 4 pitch, while Kraken swings a measly 2 damage for 6 pitch. Almost as soon as Waning Moon came out, Kraken's Aether Vein was deemed obsolete. Even with Kraken's powerful on-hit effect, 1 damage was just too easy to negate, and at 3 pitch per attack, simply too inefficient. Try as you might, even the King of the Seas reigns beneath the heavenly bodies. After a measly 4 months of play, Kraken's Aether Vein would become subservient in the shadows of the waning moon, and soon be forgotten. There was simply no reason to play it, other than in off-meta rogue decks, not when Waning Moon decks were dominating tournament after tournament.
There's their ice bolt in hand. There's the ice bolt. Metacarpus node activates again, and he gets the fist bump, and Michael Hamilton is the world champion of Flesh and Blood.
Look at that smile, Brian.
And so the cuttlefish remained at the bottom of the ocean and slumbered, awaiting the day it would wrap its tendrils around Wraith and devour the world whole. And then it was banned. On November 28th, 2023, Icelander Stormbind was banned in the classic constructed format. For those who don't know, Flesh and Blood utilizes the Living Legend card legality model. Heroes earn points by winning events. After winning 1,000 points, the hero becomes banned from all further play in the standard format. Something that is often missed though is that the hero takes not only themselves but also their signature weapon with them when they leave. There are often times where the loss of a particular weapon impacts the game more than their hero ever could. Briar's signature weapon, Rosetta Thorn, is the first example that comes to my mind. It was such a powerful weapon that many Runeblades beyond Briar ran it, and its loss shifted the tides of the meta against the class. At this point in time, when Icelander was banned, she had become so associated with Waning Moon that many forgot it was not her signature weapon. Kraken's Aether Vein had become so drowned out in the community's consciousness that its loss was generally viewed as an unfortunate comedy. After all, it was just an unintended victim of Icelander's ascension. Kraken was banned despite having barely contributed to the Ice Wizard's reign. It promised an interesting and unique facet to her game plan, but ultimately didn't live long enough to see cards that would showcase its full potential. Kraken took the last bullet that was intended for Waning Moon. Kraken's loss did little to shake up the community, beyond the occasional joke at its expense. The weapon seemed doomed to be forgotten, and for the most part it was. That was until 6 months after the banning. Heart the Mistveil, Flesh and Blood's 13th set, introduced the new keyword, Amp. The concept of Amp was that by employing it, you would boost the next bit of arcane damage you deal by whatever the Amp number was. If you Amp 1, your next attack would deal 1 more damage. Those with wisdom heeded the Dark Omen and prepared for the worst, while the rest of us common folk were too busy burning Zen at the stake. The worst would come with the release of the very next set, Rosetta, which truly opened the floodgates with an onslaught of incredibly powerful amp cards. The ones who bided their time, toiling away at their eldritch brews, finally readied themselves. Even being banned from CC couldn't stop the cephalopod monstrosity that was about to hit the game. Finally, the world shall know the true power of the Kraken. With the introduction of so many new spectacular amp cards, Kraken's Aether Vein was able to reach the pinnacle of its potential that was only hinted at in Everfest. Unfortunately, the Kraken's Aether Vein was still banned in the classic constructed format of the game, so the card's redemption would instead come in the game's legacy format, Living Legend. The Living Legend format allowed for cards and heroes from all sets to be playable, giving you access to some of the game's historically strongest decks. Starvo, Briar, Prism, and Chain were all some of the game's biggest powerhouses, each having dominated the meta when they were still legal in Standard. Yet not only did Kraken's Aether Vein match them blow for blow, it demolished them. However, this time it would not be Icelander Stormbind who used the weapon. No, the Ice Wizard had long lost the right to wield the Kraken's powers. Instead, the Kraken had a new champion. The call of the cold water abyss would be answered by the lush evergreen forests of Candlehold. To talk about Kraken Aether Vein's complete dominance of the Living Legend format is to first talk about the hero that made it work. Verdant's Thorn of the Rose, one of the game's newest wizards from the release of its most recent set. So what made Verdant so good with Kraken's Aether Vein? Well, it was this. Verdant, as an Earth hero, gained access to two of the strongest new AMP cards, Channel the Millennium Tree and Rampant Growth. Millennium Tree lets you AMP 3 at the start of your turn, which already pushes your Kraken to an almost impossible to prevent 4 Arcane. Seeing as most heroes run 3 Arcane Barrier at most, you would always be guaranteed at least 1 draw. But it didn't stop there. Rampant Growth allowed you to AMP X, where X is the number of life gained that turn. The combo would be executed with cards like Sigil of Solace, Healing Potion, and Heartbeat of Candlehold to gain life, and then play Rampant Growth to AMP for massive amounts of damage. When Rampant Growth and Millennium Tree were put together, you could reach upwards of AMP 9, if not higher, in a single turn, pushing Kraken's Aether Vein from a slightly awkward but easy to block 1 to a daunting 10 arcane damage. And need I remind you, Kraken let you draw 1 card for each damage it dealt. In this case, even if you prevented the maximum amount you could with 3 arcane barriers, Kraken would still be drawing an insane 7 cards. 7 cards. In Yu-Gi-Oh! That'll be considered a pretty strong turn. In Flesh and Blood, it's lethal. From there, you could play some more powerful attacks. You could even pass the turn, ending with enough cards to fully block out your opponent while still having a full hand to attack with. But perhaps the coolest payoff to your card draw is getting off a Fire Breathing and Thrive combo. Fire Breathing allowed you to pump its attack for every pitch, which, with a big hand, you can do a lot of. If you play Thrive on top of that, you would double the amount of attack that's increased. Here you see Logan King at the ProQuest Milwaukee, swinging Fire Breathing for a massive 30-something damage and counting. He would end the tournament with a 2nd place standing. As impressive as it was, only 2 days after Logan King's performance, LSS would announce the banning of Kraken Aether Vein. For most people, the ban came as no surprise. The writing had been on the wall for a while now, even for the people who were building and playing the deck, and the decision was pretty uncontroversial amongst the fanbase. I think that while there are some really interesting videos I could make talking about the ban itself, and how it may reflect and influence the gameplay designs of the future, I'd like to take the rest of this video to talk about the rather bittersweet end that the weapon came to. On episode 9 of the Flesh and Blood Dev Talk podcast, the creator of Flesh and Blood, James White, talked about how more support was planned for the weapon, and even showed off the art that was planned for the card. However, the decision was eventually made to discontinue design on the support. He also mentioned that the design team had always known Kraken's Aether Vein would make waves in the Living Legend format once more AMP cards were released, and that they hadn't preemptively banned it because they wanted at least one event for people to play around with the deck.
So just a little interesting backstory. So we've always known that Aether Vein is a very dangerous card, but with the release of AMP in Rosetta, we did make the conscious decision that we would let it run in Living Legend because that format is supposed to allow really powerful, the most powerful stuff to happen in Flesh and Blood. And you know, like you've spoken to this, like we at least want to give people a chance to do the broken, powerful thing at least once.
To me, I think that captures the subtle tragedy of the card. Kraken's Aether Vein was a card that always seemed destined for something great, but never got the chance to show it. It had so much potential and reflected so much possible design space, but was immediately overshadowed by an objectively stronger card, rarely used and then banned, despite never really having done anything. And when it did finally get the spotlight it deserved, it was simply too good and was banned yet again. Never did it get the chance to be played consistently in a healthy way. As of this video's filming, it remains the only card to have ever been banned in the Living Legend format, too powerful for the game's most powerful format. And just speaking personally for a moment, I love this card. I love the ocean and the underwater aesthetic, and I love the way the card is able to capture this idea of bargaining with an eldritch leviathan for knowledge in its card mechanics. It just highlights how Flesh and Blood really makes you feel like you're a part of its world. To be clear, I am in no way blaming the devs for their decisions or anything like that, nor would I be qualified to if I was. I think their reasoning for not giving Kraken more support made sense, and I agree with them and pretty much everyone else that banning it in the Living Legend format was 100% the right call. I just wanted to take a moment to talk about one of my favorite cards in the game, and maybe give it some of the genuine love that I don't think it ever really got that much of. And who knows, we thought we saw the last of Kraken's Aether Vein when Icelander LL'd, but I'd say nothing is truly impossible in this game. Could we see an eventual return of the game's strongest weapon? Or maybe we might get a retrain that reworks the card's effects in a uniquely interesting way that echoes its initial release. All we can say is that for now, below the thunders of the upper deep, far, far beneath the abysmal sea, his ancient, dreamless, uninvaded sleep, the Kraken sleepeth.